We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
What if a court made an order and nobody followed it? Are we in the Twilight Zone or the United States of America? Well, we're very fortunate to have with us somebody who can hopefully answer this question for us, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and host of the Most Excellent Uprising podcast. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Cheers, Mark. Always a pleasure.
So, Scott, it seems to me that I keep hearing or reading all of these stories about how this municipality is in the process of trying to implement a new gun restriction law that seems to me and to others to be against the Bruen decision, so recently released by the Supreme Court. And by the same token, I hear that colleges, campuses, and universities around the country are looking for ways to increase their non-white student numbers. And yet that seems to be going against the July decision that essentially put the final nail in the coffin of affirmative action. Scott, are people just not that into the Supreme Court?
Well, Mark, intransigence in the face of orders demanding that they respect the civil rights of Americans is something that many Democrat entrenched power centers have had problems with historically in this country. This goes back to the time of the breaking up of segregation and Jim Crow, when Southern Democrats decided not to obey the orders of the Supreme Court, requiring them to stop discriminating against people on the basis of their race. And so famously, we've had, whether it's Eisenhower or Kennedy sending in troops to kind of enforce these rules. And it goes straight through to today, where these almost, this is a thing that you just generally see in non-competitive Democrat dominated political structures. So where there's competition and they have to worry about somebody holding their feet to the fire, or there are others in power, it's not as bad. But where it is all just deep blue, they seem to think they can do what they want. And I think that it's a rational reaction for the politicians. As we think about this, Mark, just from an economics perspective, if those politicians, all they want is power and votes, and the people don't punish them for refusing to follow a Supreme Court decision, but it maybe in fact reward them with more power and votes, well, then their interests are actually aligned against the court and implementing those decisions.
Yes, you make some really good points there. And it kind of makes me think also about another big decision that was made recently by the Supreme Court. And that's the essentially the scuppering of Roe v. Wade and handing back the decisions on abortion to the states. Now, that doesn't apply in the same arena as the Bruen decision, which was about the right to bear firearms, because that's a constitutionally protected right. Is that correct?
Mark, in the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court said that abortion was not a constitutionally guaranteed right under most circumstances. And so that's why it sort of devolved that in the mechanisms of determining when it's okay to the states. But for instance, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen case, they found the exact opposite, which was that there was a fundamental right to keep and bear arms that the states were often imposing on. And so that's the difference.
So any efforts to go against the Bruen decision, which I believe in brief, it encapsulates that they have to, that there has to be a reason. No, there doesn't have to be a reason.
Mark, let me do it.
Owning a firearm. Please save me on this.
The essential takeaway holding was that for a regulation to be constitutional today, it would essentially have had to have been constitutional or seen as such at the time that the Second Amendment was ratified. And so that basically just knocks down this entire body of available gun controls for people who wish to tighten down gun controls. Let me just say this to you, though. The people who are doing the legislating around or through the Supreme Court decisions, depending on your perspective, they don't say we're ignoring the case. For the record, what they say is we're narrowly tailoring these laws to comply with that case. Now, that may sound preposterous to you and I when we actually read the text of the case and then read the text of the proposed legislation. But that is, in fact, what they're saying. They're not claiming the right to ignore it. They're claiming that they're acting within the scope of it.
Which is why we're getting a lot more challenges heading towards the courts, the upper levels of the courts on gun control cases. Now, the same thing appears to be applying for the Students for Fair Admission versus Cleveland and same group versus Harvard, which was the July
North
Carolina, sorry.
Yes.
Which Cleveland.
I know that you're not from here, but those are totally separate places.
I'm aware. Laverne and Shirley are from one of those.
Milwaukee, I think.
Milwaukee. Okay. Yeah. So Alice Cooper, also Milwaukee. All right. So that July decision that essentially stopped universities from discriminating based on race, which a lot of people think is a good thing. But it seems that these same universities are now trying other workarounds, even ones that have been specifically pointed out by the court to not be a workaround to increase their black student body whilst diminishing their white and Asian student bodies. But they still seem to be going at it.
Yes, their behavior really evokes these unrepentant Southern racists who did everything they could after slavery and then after Jim Crow in order to denigrate people based on their race. And that is the function now of so many of these college administrators and admissions officers. They are, to say that they have to be go kicking and screaming down the path of race neutrality is, I think, an understatement. It's baked into their DNA. And what's going to happen, I think, is just a number of cases in perpetuity where the courts continue to draw that pool smaller and smaller to the point where I could actually see a future, Mark, in some distant time when the courts grow so exasperated that they don't even allow mention of race in any way. Like, you can't say I was like the president of the African American club. You have to say I was president of an extracurricular activity, like just omitting all of it so that they can.
Well, that is one of the things that I believe was explicitly forbidden by the ruling. Is because the universities, they're asking for essays, but the people who advise potential students on essays, they're saying, yes, make it about your struggle and about your identity. So essentially they're saying, hey, look, I'm black, or I'm this protected characteristic, or right. This oppressed group, therefore look at me, at me, and thereby gain that advantage in admissions.
Mark, so if you the gaming of these admissions is an interest of mine, and I think that what you'll have is, and by the way, this is not generally the case for the local kind of state university that has some competition. This is for the elite university slots.
I know where you're going with this. I know exactly where you're going with this.
What's going to happen is you're going to have a Caucasian student who has no African ancestry or quote unquote minority ancestry, and they will be able to craft an essay that truthfully discusses their experience in life and gives a wanting reader the impression that they are in fact an African American or a descendant of American slavery, but that they're not, and they will be able to leverage. And guess who that's going to benefit? Well, so I think that you're right. For one cycle or so, maybe we'll see blacks or the administrators use the essay system to generate, acceptance based on race. But then I think quickly thereafter, it'll be co-opted. And so it'll be nibbled away at slowly but surely. I think, we're not there. We won't have 100% compliance right away, but I think at some point we will get close to it.
Well, I mean, that may even end up being the case with the Bruin decision, but it doesn't seem as likely.
Just to kick in the teeth before we leave that topic, I want to say that's, of course, if anybody sees the utility in attending college and university at all going forward. The prevalence of online classes and free education is just booming. So
it absolutely is. And I believe Jordan Peterson is in the process of setting up the Peterson Academy that intends to deliver a fully accredited. This is not a sponsorship post, by the way. It's just something I read about recently. a fully accredited degree for around $4,000.
I just saw a headline from a non-ideological source yesterday that indicated 2 big companies were dropping their undergraduate degree requirements in the United States. I think it's the idea that the colleges impart something other than obedience to the mainstream is
the Prussian model of education is a topic for another time. Scott D. Cosenza, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests, Sarah Cowgill, Andrew Moran, and Scott D. Cosenza, and of course you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in and join us there at home. We at Liberty Nation Radio wish you the very, very best for the new year and hope that you're keeping free thinking and free speech at the top of everything that you do. Thanks for being here. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.